What's up everybody, Pacific Northwest Noob here with my first fishing video. This was at a subscriber request. I want to start off with surf perch fishing because I think it is the most beginner friendly, low budget, fun type of fishing that you can possibly do, whether you're brand new to fishing or an expert. Side bonus, it's also one of the most delicious fish to eat in the Pacific Northwest.
Redtail surf perch can be found up and down the Pacific coast of the United States. Oftentimes you can catch surf perch in as little as 18 inches of water and as close as 30 feet from the shoreline. Surf perch are cousins to the same kind of perch that swim around in lakes and ponds, and just like those fish, they like to swim around in large schools. So if you catch one, stay where you're at, you're bound to catch more. Pretty much all the live footage you're going to see on this video is from a random vacation that I took with my family to Seaside. It was a pretty terrible day. I just kind of went fishing on a whim. More so to prove that you can go to an area that's not ideal in terrible weather conditions and still have fun catching surf perch. The fishing footage is going to be from the Cove in Seaside. If I have a place where I'm going to be vacationing and I want to fish somewhere close, I'll generally use an app like what's pictured. This is ArgoNav, and I'll look for basically where the water is deepest closer to the beach. So if you look at the very bottom there, right before that piece of land juts out to the left, you can see that the water line kind of comes closer to the beach. That means it's going to be deeper right there. You want to plan to be fishing about 2 hours before high tide. As the tide comes up, it's going to start washing away the sand, and it's going to start churning up little pieces of perch food like sand crabs and sandworms and all those other little goodies that perch eat to live on. I'll usually fish for about a half hour after high tide, but I'm not going to fish much longer than that. To find a tide chart, you can just Google tide chart and then whatever city you're closest to. There's generally 2 high tides during a day, a major and a minor. This trip I actually fished on a minor tide just to prove that you can. So you want to look for holes and troughs. These are going to be deep. You can tell if there's a hole there because a wave will not be connected all the way across. As it rolls towards you, you'll see like a white cap, and then it'll be smooth, and then another white cap. A trough is a deep spot that runs parallel with the shore, and you can generally tell a trough because it'll have some breaker waves kind of really far out, and then before those waves start to break, they'll smooth really good, and then you'll have waves closer to shore. That means that there's a deep spot in between where those 2 waves were building.
All right, so the trick to doing this without getting your feet too wet is to wait for a wave to come in. About every 7th wave is going to be what's called a sneaker wave, and it's going to come in a lot farther. Like you see the water line right here. These are where the waves have been coming up to, and those waves that are stopping out there. So I'm actually just going to wait until one of those sneaker waves comes in and comes up to the water line, and then I'm going to follow it out. Those sneaker waves come in the furthest, and then they also go out the furthest. Follow it out, and I'm going to try and cast for that spot right there where the waves, the white caps actually split. So we're gonna follow it out as fast as we can. Throw that guy out there. Not exactly where I wanted it, but we'll deal with it. On the way back in, just let everything kind of free spool, and you can walk back to wherever you want.
When you do get a fish bite, it's going to feel like a chihuahua is playing tug of war with your fishing pole. Go ahead and set the hook by lifting the pole up quickly.
And that's going to set the hook for you. Now, when you're surf perch fishing, generally you're casting so far out that you're going to be reeling in a lot of line. Oh, this is a good one. You're going to be reeling in a lot of line, and you want to keep reeling in just as fast as you can, because these things will try and run all over the place. Yep, that's a little red tail. I'm just going to back them up to the sand. We're actually going to be releasing these guys today.
While you're surf perch fishing, you can also catch other types of fish. I caught this massive flounder about 2 minutes after I caught that last surf perch.
So before we get started, I did want to say I am going to be throwing out a lot of brand names and kind of suggestions. I'm absolutely not sponsored by anybody, and I'm only throwing these out to you guys because I've used them and they just work really good. So just starting off with some of the gear, this is literally the size tackle box that I use, and I could get away with a tackle box a lot smaller than this. Surf perch fishing takes very little tackle. The only weights I really end up using are these flat 2 ounce and a 4 ounce. When I go out, I'm going to start off on a 2 ounce, and if that's not working well for me, I'll swap to a 4 ounce, like if the wind's blowing too hard or the waves are really crashing. Hooks are going to be number 2. I use a circle, also known as a octopus hook or squid hook. I like to buy kind of expensive hooks. That's the one thing that I really will splurge on. I like to go with something like a gamakatsu or something kind of higher end that's going to be very sharp, and I'm not going to lose fish because of it. Berkeley gulp sandworm, only thing I use for bait. You can dig sand crabs if you want to. I just found that these are a lot easier, and actually I find that these kind of work better than actually using live bait like a sand crab. Just make sure you get them in 2-inch. I believe there's a 6-inch out there. The reason for that is the fish are biting at the tails of these because that's what's kind of giving the most action. And you can actually, a lot of times, even with these 2 inches, I'll get a lot of bites and they're just tearing the tail off and not actually hitting high enough on the hook. If you use a super long worm, they're probably just going to be ripping the tail off most of the time. I also like to use the camo color, so these are brown on one side and green on the other. Little 25-yard spool of fluorocarbon for a leader. You can use 10 to 25 pounds, but I think 10 is usually generally a better option for surf perch fishing. So for a rod, we're just going to look for something in the 8 to 12 foot range. It doesn't have to be super expensive. If you have a bass rod that's like 8 foot and it's got like a medium to medium heavy action, it's going to work for this. You do not have to cast extremely far out there. This is my wife's salmon rod that I like to steal when she's not going surf perch fishing with me. It's a 10-foot medium heavy action, and it works very well for surf perch fishing and getting it way out there. But you don't have to have this. An 8-foot rod, medium heavy action will do just fine. If you want to buy a rod for surf perch fishing, they're actually really cheap. If you go on Amazon, you can actually find an Okuma, I believe it's a Tundra, which is kind of like the staple beginner surf perch rod, for like less than 60 bucks. The reason I steal my wife's salmon rod is it has this really nice Fluger President spinning reel on it. Pretty much all of my rods that are kind of that medium heavy have what's called a bait casting reel. It's not super user friendly if you're trying to cast really far out there. So I find that while I do like those kind of reels for stuff like salmon and steelhead, I just find that for surf perch fishing, I like to kick it with the old school spinning reel. Generally, I'll go with like a 20 to 30 pound main line. So this is actually braided. Again, this is my wife's salmon rod. You do not need a braided line. You can get away with like a 20 or 30 pound monofilament as your main line. All right, so from the main line, I like to put in some kind of a swivel. This is just a real small barrel swivel, nothing too fancy. So to tie this, you're gonna take that fluorocarbon leader. Fluorocarbon is pretty important because it basically turns invisible underwater. Really, it doesn't matter what your main line looks like. It's whatever line your bait is on is what's important. Fluorocarbon, like I said, disappears underneath water, so I always use fluorocarbon for my leader. So kind of starting from the bottom up, I'm actually going to start with where I'm going to attach my weight, and I'm just going to do a double overhand knot. From there, I'm going to go up about a foot, and I'm going to tie my dropper knot in there. And I like to have my dropper to have about 3 to 4 inches of play in it, kind of like this one does. That way, as this thing's sitting on the bottom and I've got my line tight, it still has play, like you can see it go back and forth. So the waves will actually move that around and just make that bait look real. Then go up about another 12 to 16 inches, do another dropper just like the first one. And then I like to tie just a standard fisherman's knot to my barrel swivel, but you can actually just do a double overhand with this one as well. I'll put a website for all those knots up right now. That is the basic setup there. The weight's on the bottom and you got your 2 lures up above the weight. As this kind of goes through the sand, the weight's going to kind of bounce along the bottom. If you keep tension on it, you'll be able to kind of constantly move the weight closer and closer to the shore. Hey, Poocher. Hi. Well, that's your introduction to surf perch fishing. Thank you everybody for watching. If you have any comments, critiques, or requests for my next video, please leave them in the comments below. Other than that, please like and subscribe. It really helps me get my channel off the ground, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.